The unexpected invitation. The sun set slowly over the horizon of Earth, casting a soft orange glow across the landscape. It was a quiet evening, one that felt like any other. But on this day, the peacefulness was about to be shattered by something no one could have expected. The human race had lived for centuries without even a hint of the chaos that was about to unfold. Little did they know, the galaxy's most powerful species were about to arrive. And they came with a plan that was set to change everything. The aliens, known as the Draxians, had been watching Earth from a distance for years. Their advanced technology allowed them to study the humans without being seen, and they had come to a conclusion. To the Draxians, humans were nothing more than a primitive species, barely worth their time. The Draxians were known for their cruelty, their thirst for power, and their belief that they were the supreme species in the galaxy. They had conquered countless worlds, enslaved entire civilizations, and left destruction in their wake. But when they discovered Earth, they were intrigued. The planet was full of life, yet it seemed so fragile compared to the mighty worlds they had already taken over. Earth was full of resources, and the humans seemed too weak to put up any kind of resistance. It was the perfect opportunity for the Draxians to strike once again, and they didn't even need to lift a finger. They could simply invade, take the resources, and leave the planet to crumble under their control. However, as with all things in the universe, even the Draxians couldn't predict what was about to happen. The humans, for reasons unknown to the Draxians, sent out a mysterious invitation. The message was simple and to the point. "We offer you a feast," it read. "Join us on Earth to partake in a meal like no other." The Draxians didn't understand why the humans would offer them a feast. Surely, they thought, this was just a trick to buy time or a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. But whatever the reason, the Draxians were intrigued. And so, they accepted. The invitation was sent to the leader of the Draxian fleet, General Xalar, a ruthless and calculating commander. Xalar had never experienced anything like this before. The humans were offering food, and he knew that in their weakness, they would likely try to win the Draxians over with false gestures of friendship. It was amusing to him, but at the same time, there was a strange feeling of curiosity. Why would the humans think a meal would sway the Draxians? What could they possibly offer that was worth even considering? Xalar convened with his most trusted officers. The fleet was ready. They would arrive on Earth in just a few hours. The plan was simple. They would land, eat whatever the humans offered, and leave as quickly as possible. If the meal was poisoned or a trap, they would simply destroy the humans and continue their conquest of the galaxy. It seemed like the perfect plan. As the Draxian fleet approached Earth, the massive ships hovered silently above the planet. Their enormous size cast long shadows over the cities below, and the people on Earth could only watch in awe and fear. The world knew the aliens were coming, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. The humans had prepared the feast in secret, but only a few understood the true purpose of the gathering. The majority of the human population was unaware of the strange, powerful guests arriving from the stars. All they knew was that their leaders had promised a peaceful meeting. This was a chance for diplomacy, a chance to show that humanity was not just a weak species to be crushed by alien forces. As the Draxians disembarked from their ships, they were greeted by a strange sight. Humans stood before them, holding trays of food that seemed simple, nothing too extravagant, just fruit, bread, and other earthly dishes. The Draxians looked at each other in confusion. They had expected something more. Something grander. General Xalar stepped forward, his cold, alien eyes scanning the humans. He nodded slightly, signaling his officers to begin eating. But the moment they took their first bite, something unusual happened. The food, at first, tasted bland. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. Yet, as they ate more, something shifted. It wasn't the taste that changed, but the way they felt. The Draxians, beings of immense power and strength, suddenly felt weak. Their energy was draining from them, and they could no longer focus as clearly as they had before. It was as if the food was somehow affecting their very bodies, their minds, their very essence. A deep unease settled over General Sailor. His stomach churned, but it was not from the food. No, it was something far more sinister. The humans were not just feeding them. This was no ordinary feast. The meal was a trap, and the Draxians had walked right into it. Zalor's mind raced as he tried to regain control, but it was too late. The humans had planned for this moment. They had known what the aliens would think. The meal was not just a gift. It was a weapon designed to weaken and confuse their enemies. The general felt a cold sweat forming on his forehead. He had been too sure of himself. He had underestimated the humans. But now, as the strange sensation in his body spread, he realized that the feast had a much deeper meaning than he could have ever imagined. The meal was just the beginning. Something much bigger was at play, and the Draxians had unknowingly become part of it. As the Draxians continued eating, an unsettling silence fell over the gathering. The initial odd sensation from the meal had faded, but it wasn't gone. At first, they tried to brush it off, chalking it up to unfamiliar food or perhaps just the exhaustion of their long journey. But as each bite was taken, the feeling intensified, spreading like a quiet storm within their bodies. General Sailor, the unshakable leader of the Draxian fleet, felt it first. A heaviness in his limbs, a fog creeping into his mind. It wasn't the food. It couldn't be. The Draxians had consumed far more dangerous substances during their travels. Yet this was different. There was something strange, something unnatural about it. Zalor pushed the thought aside, refusing to let the discomfort distract him. His people were strong, invincible even. They had conquered entire planets, wiped out civilizations far older than Earth's. But now, sitting in front of the humans, they felt strangely vulnerable. The strength that had once flowed through their veins was slipping away, replaced by a feeling they had never experienced before: fear. He stood, trying to steady himself, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. The room was spinning. The once clear skies outside the windows now seemed distorted, blurry. His officers began to notice it too. Their movements were slower, their eyes glazed, and their minds seemed distant. Each alien face that had once been full of confidence and superiority now looked confused, uncertain. The Draxians were powerful warriors, feared across the galaxy, but in this moment, they were weak, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of the humans. "What is happening to us?" one of the officers asked, his voice trembling slightly. The room's quiet buzz was growing louder in their minds, a strange hum that only added to the confusion. The sensation in their bodies was not just physical. It felt like something deeper was being affected. It was as if the meal was altering not just their strength, but their very sense of self. Zalor turned to his second-in-command, a fierce alien known as Korak. But even Korak, who had fought in countless battles, was now slumped in his chair, eyes unfocused. "This is no ordinary food," Zalor said, his voice low and full of disbelief. "We've been poisoned, but in a way I've never seen before." The realization hit them like a hammer. The humans had prepared this meal, this trap, with a methodical precision that left no room for error. The Draxians had underestimated them, thought of them as insignificant, weak creatures, easy prey for their superior technology and strength. But in that moment, as their minds grew foggy and their bodies grew weak, the aliens began to understand just how wrong they had been. Outside the building, Earth's sky turned darker, as if the very planet was reacting to the tension building within the alien gathering. The humans stood by, watching the Draxians struggle, a few of them exchanging knowing glances. This wasn't just a feast, it was a carefully crafted plan to bring their invaders to their knees. Zalor tried to rally his thoughts, but it was hard to focus. The hum in his mind grew louder, almost like a voice, whispering to him in a language he couldn't understand. It wasn't the language of the humans, but something else, something ancient, something primal. His vision blurred again, and for a moment, he thought he saw the shadows of something more terrifying than any enemy he had ever faced. A feeling of dread settled in his stomach. As the meal continued, the other Draxians began to feel it more intensely. One by one, they started to gasp for air, clutching their chests, their faces contorting with confusion and fear. They could no longer move as they had before. Their once steady hands trembled, and their bodies seemed to betray them. It was as if they were being drained of their power, their very essence siphoned away with each bite they took. The more they tried to resist, the stronger the feeling became, until it felt like an unstoppable force was suffocating them. Zalor's thoughts began to race. He was a leader, a conqueror, but now he was helpless, a mere shadow of his former self. His mind screamed for clarity, for a solution, but nothing came. It was as if the feast had stolen his ability to think, to plan, to command. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Meanwhile, the humans watched with cold precision, their faces unreadable. They had known the Draxians would fall victim to the feast, but none of them seemed surprised. The humans had studied their invaders for years, gathering information, learning their weaknesses, preparing for this moment. They knew that the Draxians would come to Earth with their usual arrogance, and they had a plan in place. This meal wasn't just a trap for the body, it was a trap for the mind, for the soul. And the Draxians were already in it. One of the human leaders, a woman named Dr. Lena Marcus, stood at the head of the room. She had been watching as the aliens weakened, their power slipping away like sand through their fingers. She had worked for years to create this moment. She had studied alien species, their biology, and their minds. And now, she saw it. The Draxians, so confident, so sure of their superiority, were finally beginning to realize that they had walked into a trap they couldn't escape. The feast had worked. Zalor's eyes locked with Dr. Marcus's, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. He had been the one to lead his people to this planet. And now, in front of him, was a human who had brought him to his knees. The great General Zalor, the conqueror, now stood before the humans as nothing more than a frightened alien, desperate to understand what had just happened. Why? Zalor finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse and filled with venom. Why do you do this to us? Dr. Marcus stepped forward, her face calm, almost serene. Because, General, you thought we were weak. You thought that just because you were stronger, we would bend to your will. But what you didn't understand is that true strength doesn't come from power alone. It comes from knowing your enemy and turning their arrogance against them. Zalor, unable to comprehend the full extent of his downfall, staggered back. The true meaning of the feast was slowly dawning on him, and it terrified him more than any battle he had ever fought. The Draxians were no longer in control. The once feared conquerors were now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, struggling to stay conscious as the effects of the feast took hold. General Zalor, who had commanded entire fleets with an iron fist, was now struggling to keep his balance. His knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed onto the ground with a grunt, his powerful body unable to support him any longer. The other Draxians were in similar states of disarray, their once great strength drained completely. They had been brought to their knees, not by weapons or tactics, but by something far more insidious, something they never expected. The humans, calm and collected, watched the scene unfold before them. There was no triumph in their eyes, no gloating over the downfall of their enemies. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, an understanding that this moment had been carefully orchestrated over years, and that the true battle was only just beginning. Dr. Lena Marcus, the leader of the human faction that had devised this plan, stood at the center of the room, her eyes never leaving the fallen Draxian leader. She had seen the signs, the strange whispers, the warnings of what was to come, but now that it was happening, Even she couldn't ignore the immense weight of what they were about to uncover. "What did you do to us?" Zayler's voice was raspy, filled with disbelief and anger. His eyes glinted with fear as he tried to stand, but his limbs refused to cooperate. Lena stepped forward, her gaze never wavering. "We didn't poison you, General. Not in the way you think." Zayler's mind raced, struggling to comprehend her words. "Then what is this? What is happening to us?" The room was heavy with tension, and the Draxians' once proud demeanor had shattered completely. They had thought they were the masters of the galaxy, that no one could challenge them. Now, they were at the mercy of these small, fragile humans who had done something to them without even lifting a finger. Lena motioned for her team to move forward. A few of the humans, dressed in simple attire but with an air of undeniable authority, approached the Draxians. They began to connect strange devices to the aliens' heads, placing small sensors to measure their brain activity and vital signs. Sailor's eyes darted between them, the confusion only growing. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "What have you done to us?" "You've been eating more than just food, General," Lena replied softly, her voice almost calm, as if she were explaining a complex theory to a child. "What you've consumed isn't just nourishment. It's a gateway, a key." Zeller's mind struggled to grasp what she was saying. A key to what? Lena paused before answering, her eyes cold but compassionate. "To your own fears, to the very core of your being. You thought you came here to conquer, to consume, to take whatever you wanted from Earth. But what you didn't know is that we knew who you were long before you arrived. We studied you, and we learned what drives you, what makes you powerful." Zaller's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "You see, General, the food you ate wasn't just meant to weaken your body. It was designed to break down your mind, to unravel your thoughts and fears. And in the process, it's revealing the truth about who you really are." A deep silence filled the room. The Draxians looked at each other, their faces filled with both confusion and horror. They were beginning to feel something they had never allowed themselves to feel before: doubt. "What truth?" Zayler asked, his voice trembling. "What are you doing to us?" Lena smiled faintly. "We didn't need to defeat you in battle. We didn't need to fire a single shot. All we had to do was show you your own weaknesses, to expose the lies you've told yourselves for centuries." The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The Draxians had been the perfect conquerors, ruthless and unyielding, but they had been blind to one simple truth. They had never understood the very essence of what made other species strong. The humans had known for a long time that brute strength alone was not enough to ensure victory. It was understanding your enemy, knowing their fears, their vulnerabilities, and using that knowledge to your advantage. You never understood that true strength comes from within. Lena continued, her voice unwavering. "You thought you could control everything with your power, with your might. But what you didn't realize is that we, humans, have something far stronger than your weapons. We have the ability to adapt, to learn, to change. And most importantly, we have the courage to face our deepest fears." Zilor felt his chest tighten as her words struck him like a blow. The fog in his mind grew thicker, and for the first time, he realized something. His entire life had been driven by a single powerful force: fear. Fear of weakness, fear of failure, fear of losing control. It was that fear that had pushed him to become the ruthless leader he was, the one who had conquered worlds and enslaved civilizations. But now, that fear was turning against him. The meal had not just drained his physical strength, it was pulling out the darkest parts of his mind, exposing the fears and insecurities he had buried deep within himself. His eyes widened as memories he had long buried came flooding back, memories of his first battle, of the moment he had become the monster he was, of the countless lives he had destroyed. His hands trembled, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never known: regret. "The feast wasn't just about food, General," Lena said, her voice steady but full of meaning. "It was about understanding. understanding who you really are. Zeller's mind spiraled, his thoughts spinning out of control. The power that had once been his was slipping away, replaced by something far worse, self-doubt. The very essence of his existence was unraveling, piece by piece, as the humans stood there, watching him fall apart. The truth was clear now, but it was a truth that Zeller had never wanted to see. The mighty Draxians were not invincible. They were not immune to fear, to weakness, to the very flaws that had driven them to conquer and destroy. And now, those flaws were tearing them apart from the inside. General Zeller was no longer the creature he once believed himself to be. He sat hunched against the cold metal wall of the human ship, eyes wide open but unfocused, as if the very idea of reality had begun to slip through his claws. Around him, the other Draxians murmured to themselves or lay silent, their confidence shattered like glass under pressure. Their bodies were still strong, but their minds were no longer in one piece. Dr. Lena Marcus stood a few feet away, watching carefully. She wasn't gloating. She had no joy in watching enemies suffer, but she also knew this had to happen. The plan had been in motion for years, even before the Draxians first invaded Earth's orbit. Humans had learned from history. They knew that aliens who conquered planets often failed to understand one thing: the heart and mind of those they tried to break. "You don't understand," Zeller whispered, his voice cracked and dry. "We were trying to save ourselves." Lena stepped closer, puzzled by his words. "Save yourselves? By destroying us?" Zeller raised his head slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, but something had changed in them. There was no hatred anymore. Only pain, confusion, and something worse: remorse. "You think we came here to dominate, to feed, to strip Earth of its life. But it wasn't just that," he said slowly, as if the words hurt him to speak. "We were running from something." The room fell quiet. Even the humans' monitoring systems stopped typing and turned to listen. Lena's eyes narrowed. Running? From what? Zeller leaned his head back against the wall. "From the voices in the dark. From a shadow we created, and could no longer stop." Lena's breath caught. She had suspected the Draxians were hiding something. Something deeper than conquest. Something worse than hunger. Now, the truth was beginning to surface. Zeller continued, each word dragging from his throat like it was chained. "Centuries ago, we discovered a world far beyond your stars. A world filled with strange energy, knowledge, and life. We thought we could control it, use it to evolve, to become gods among species." "What happened?" Lena asked. Zeller's body trembled. "We consumed it. The energy, the life, the mind of that place. It entered us, changed us. At first, it made us strong, but it also planted something inside us. A seed." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That seed grew into a curse. It began to speak in our minds, to whisper. We became smarter, more powerful, but also more afraid. The stronger we got, the louder the voices became. And then, some of us began to vanish. Entire colonies lost. They weren't destroyed by war. They just turned on themselves." Lena's team stared at each other in silence. One of the scientists muttered, "A mental virus." "No," Lena said quietly, her mind racing. "Something worse. A psychic infection. A presence that waits for a mind strong enough to hold it, then destroys it from the inside." Zeller nodded weakly. "We didn't know where else to go. Earth was a last chance. We thought, if we could consume humans, absorb your resilience, your hope, maybe we could silence the voices." Lena stepped back. The plan suddenly made sense. The Draxians hadn't chosen Earth because it was weak. They chose it because it was strong, not in weapons, but in something far deeper. In willpower. In the ability to suffer and still stand. To lose and still hope. "You came here thinking you could eat our strength," she said slowly. "But what you didn't know was that human strength isn't just in the flesh." Zalor closed his eyes. Now it's too late. The seed is awake again, because of what we consumed. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. All eyes turned toward the ceiling. The ship shook, not from outside impact, but from something within. Machines began to beep wildly. One of the human techs shouted, "We've got energy spikes. Psychic interference from the Draxians' brain activity. It's rising fast." "No," Lena whispered, running to the screens. "They didn't just bring the infection. They activated it again." One of the Draxians in the corner screamed suddenly, a sound not made of fear, but of madness. He clutched his head, fell to the ground, and began to speak in a voice not his own. A dark, rumbling voice, layered and ancient. "You unlocked the gate," the voice said through the alien's mouth. "You dared feed the storm. Now the storm feeds on you." The human soldiers raised their weapons, unsure of what to do. The room turned colder, as if reality itself had grown thinner. The walls hummed, and shadows stretched where they shouldn't have. Something was entering their world, and it wasn't part of the physical realm. Lena's heart pounded. Get him into isolation. Now. But it was too late. The infected Draxian's eyes turned black, and dark liquid began to leak from his ears. He wasn't alive anymore, not in any real sense. He had become a door. A whisper filled every human and Draxian mind in that room. A voice that echoed not in the air, but inside the soul. "You fed on the past. Now we return to feed on you." Lena realized the truth. The feast was not just a trap for the Draxians. It had also become a summoning. The ancient force that had destroyed their empire had been sleeping inside them, waiting to rise again. And by consuming Earth's life, the Draxians had unknowingly given it strength. The humans weren't just dealing with aliens anymore. They were about to face something far older. Something hungry. The room was filled with an eerie silence, but that quiet was deceptive. Inside every mind, something was stirring. Something ancient and far more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. The presence that had been growing, feeding off the Draxians and the humans alike, was now awake. It wasn't just a force. It was a consciousness, one that had slumbered for millennia. And now it was fully aware of its freedom. The infected Draxian on the floor continued to convulse, his body jerking violently as his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. But it wasn't his smile. It was the smile of something far darker, something that did not belong to the world of the living. The voice that had spoken through him echoed again in the minds of every living soul in the room. "You have awakened the storm," it whispered, cold and malevolent. "And now, you will pay the price." Lena stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized the magnitude of the threat. This wasn't just a simple psychic infection. This was an entity, an ancient being, one that had been dormant for eons, and it had now been unleashed upon them. The Draxians had never fully understood what they were dealing with. They had thought they could control it, harness it, but now they were its prisoners. And the humans, well, they had no idea just how much danger they were in. "Lena," a voice snapped her out of her shock. It was Dr. Quinn, one of her top scientists, his face pale with fear. "We need to get out of here. The ship's systems are failing. The entity is messing with everything. The energy spikes are out of control." Lena turned to him, her mind racing. The ship was no longer in her control. The systems were shutting down, flickering like dying embers. They couldn't fight this with conventional weapons. The entity they had awakened was beyond any physical force they could muster. It was an intangible presence, a being of pure consciousness, able to warp reality itself. But they couldn't afford to give up. Not now. "Focus," Lena ordered, her voice steely. "We need to find a way to contain it before it spreads. This entity is feeding off the Draxians, but it's getting stronger. If we don't stop it now, it could consume everything in its path." The room shook again, harder this time. The walls groaned, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air, like thunder in the distance. The entity's influence was growing, and with it, the chaos on the ship. "We don't have much time," Quinn said urgently. "It's not just messing with the ship's systems. It's reaching out. I can feel it. It's trying to find more minds to consume." Lena's eyes flicked to the Draxians, who were still struggling to regain their strength. They had been weak, vulnerable, but now, with the entity fully awake, they were no longer just victims. They were its hosts. And the humans were next. "We need to isolate the source," Lena said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "Quinn, can you track the energy signature? Can we find the epicenter?" Quinn nodded quickly, his fingers flying over the controls of a nearby terminal. "I can pinpoint the center of the energy flow, but we'll need to be close to the source. The further we get from it, the weaker the signal becomes. We need to act fast." Lena didn't hesitate. "Get your team ready. We're going in." The team quickly gathered around, their expressions grim. They knew that they were about to face something far beyond their understanding. But they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy, maybe even the universe, depended on stopping the storm before it consumed everything. Lena turned to the Draxians, who were beginning to stir again, their eyes wild with panic. "You have to help us," she said firmly, though her voice held no hope for their cooperation. "If you want to survive this, you need to work with us." Xelor, who had been silent since his revelation, looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of dread and shame. "We did not know. We never knew what we were unleashing." "We don't have time for guilt," Lena replied, her gaze hard. "We need to work together if we're going to contain this thing." Xelor stood shakily, helping another Draxian to his feet. "Where do we begin?" Lena gestured toward the control room. "Follow me. We need to isolate the entity's core. It's hidden deep in the ship, and we need to stop it from spreading." The team moved quickly, the urgency of their mission pressing down on them. The ship's corridors seemed to stretch longer than they had before, twisting and turning like they were being manipulated by some unseen force. The walls hummed ominously, and the temperature dropped sharply. It was as if the ship itself was alive, fighting against them, trying to keep them from reaching their goal. Quinn led the way, following the readings on his device. "We're getting close," he said, his voice tight with fear. "I can feel it in my head. It's pulling at me." Lena didn't stop. Ignore it. Focus on the task. But it was getting harder. The deeper they went into the ship, the more the entity's presence pressed in on their minds. It wasn't just a psychic infection anymore. It was a full-on attack, assaulting their thoughts, feeding on their fears. The voices began, soft at first, whispering doubts, whispering lies. "You're not strong enough. You can't stop this. Give in. Surrender. It's already too late." The voices were louder now, but Lena gritted her teeth, pushing them aside. She wouldn't let this thing take her mind. Not now. Not when they were so close. Finally, they reached the core, the heart of the storm. The room was dark, the air thick with tension, and the floor seemed to vibrate beneath their feet. At the center of the room, floating in midair, was a swirling mass of energy, a glowing, shifting cloud of darkness. It was beautiful, yet horrifying. The energy seemed to pulse, to breathe, as if alive. Lena stepped forward, the weight of the situation bearing down on her. This is it, the source of the storm. The Draxians behind her trembled. Xelor's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do?" Lena took a deep breath. "We have to destroy it before it spreads beyond this ship. We need to sever the connection it has to the Draxians' minds." Quinn turned to her, panic in his eyes. "How do we do that? We have no weapons that can stop something like this." Lena's mind raced. She had to think fast. She remembered something from her research, something the ancient texts had hinted at, a way to disrupt psychic energy using a concentrated pulse. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "I have an idea," she said, taking a step closer to the swirling mass of energy. "It's risky, but it's the only way.